Well, good morning. If you're joining us in Johannesburg, bit of a heat wave, so no stress if you're going to take 2 seconds to go and fetch a fan real quick. If you're in other parts of the country, good morning and welcome to this special Financial Mail digitized event in association with the NAB. This morning, very exciting conversation with some of the NAB commercial radio members. It's very rare that we get into a Zoom room with these four voices to speak this morning about integrating platforms to support communities and connect stakeholders. It's been a crazy year, and by all accounts, things are set to get even crazier as we progress into 2021, amidst a global pandemic, amidst social movements, amidst everything that has happened since January 1st, 2020. Where does it all leave radio? That's the question that we're asking this morning. Welcome to the boardroom table. Around this table this morning, competitors but friends. Let's say hello this morning to MD at Algoa FM, Alfie J, Hasina Kasim, MD at YFM, Nick Efstatiu, who's the CEO at Central Media Group, and Bonnie Nkunu, MD at East Coast Radio. Good morning, everyone. Did everyone's morning shows go well this morning? All the power spots were executed correctly. There's no clients that are upset with how you pronounce their brand names. Everyone good?
All good.
Absolutely.
All good. Yeah.
Fantastic.
All good.
No fires to put out at 9:01 in the morning. All right, let's get straight into it. One of the topics that we're talking about this morning, and everyone's going to weigh in on the live chat and ask their questions, but one of the big themes this morning is, what does radio look like in the context of a pandemic? What does that evolution look like in the context of a pandemic? And Bonnie, let me come to you in terms of the conversations and the thoughts and the sentiments at East Coast Radio in 2020 around what your product looks like and what your brand looks like amidst a global pandemic, and that as the backdrop.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ari. I think for me, if you think about every pandemic that has ever happened in this lifetime, I think all pandemics fuel innovation. And I think as a radio, we've done that very well. I mean, if you look at how radio as an industry, but many other industries have kind of caught up with digitalization and catching up with those kind of things. So if you look at digital sales, how digital sales have done during this time, it is skyrocketing. And if you would have asked people, all South Africans, even globally, if they were going to do things that they have done as a result of COVID digitally, most people would have said, no, we wouldn't be able to do that. So I think radio is really unmatched in terms of being able to reach people. It has a reach of 92% and be able to engage with people meaningfully. But what has worked for us really well during this time is to understand our ecosystem and make sure that during this time we are present in all ecosystem instead of just being on radio and radio alone.
Nick, let's talk about that ecosystem and what it looked like, say, in 2019 versus what it's become forced to look like in 2020. I mean, we know that towards the beginning of lockdown, the role of radio in sort of disseminating accurate information suddenly took on a whole new meaning. The importance of, really serving listeners from an information perspective to keep them safe over and above trying to sort of achieve the commercial objectives that you have. But if you had to sort of start differentiating between what the ecosystem looks like or needs to look like now versus what it may have looked like 365 days ago, how would you begin to articulate that shift in what your radio environment and the world in which it plays looks like?
Yeah, good morning. I think what has happened in our industry and in our sector is that we've realized how agile radio actually is and how powerful it always has been, but how more powerful it has become. During this age where information sharing and, without stealing words out of Trump's mouth, fake news has been disseminated through other channels, radio is the one trusted platform that is believed, is real time. It's the platform where we can disseminate information quickly. At the same time, with the agility that it's got, we are in a position where, as marketing partners to our clients, we are able to change their messaging quite quickly, to be more empathetic at a time when we need to be more closer to our communities than ever before. We need to be responsible brands in the industry. We need to be in a position where it's very important for us to be leading our communities in a fight against a pandemic of this nature. with the correct information at the right time on the right channel. So radio's led that way. I mean, during this pandemic, we've seen a substantial increase in radio listenership, not just on the FM transmitters, but also through our stream services. It's also, you know, when you find yourself outside of your own community because you were locked down and you could not move, you find the channel that you can engage your favorite radio station because it makes you feel more closer to home. So I think radio has done tremendously well in being able to bring communities closer, being able to assist our clients, our marketing partners, and our listeners during a very, very deep, dark time.
Sina, let's pick up on agility. January, you know, YFM has 1,000,001 plans for activations, thousands of people at concerts and events around the country. They have these sponsorships locked in. Let's talk about agility from a serving the listener in terms of information perspective, and then also agility from a commercial perspective in terms of reshifting what you're going to be doing with brands in an ever-changing environment where Cyril's going to come on, President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to come on TV, and everything's going to change. Suddenly alcohol is going to be banned and that event can't happen. So talk to me about agility from a serving people with accurate information perspective, and then agility in terms of serving brands that you need in order to keep things running.
Firstly, I can see that you're quite au fait with the YFM audience and what we actually do. About events and the partying phase and the alcohol consumption, and yeah. So naturally, I think this has been probably the toughest year. No one could have prepared us for it. From a leadership perspective, agility has obviously been the key factor. From an audience point of view, you know what always comes to mind is I actually read an article a couple of weeks ago by Robert Tanner, and he talks about change and how people are averse, or the thinking, the general thinking is that people are averse to change. The reality is that people are only averse to change if it doesn't benefit them. So I think the key thing is that we've done over the last while is to look at the change that our audience has had to go through, and the fact that we haven't had any events, and shift the thinking and shift the space to get the audience to understand that the changes are actually beneficial to them. What we've also seen is that, across a number of research platforms, you found depression as one of the key things that have actually come out. And if you're thinking about young people, 15 to 34, looking at life as they're on the cusp of greatness, and all of a sudden you're stuck. So what you would usually do in an ordinary weekend, like going to an event, is no longer happening. What we did in the first month of lockdown, I think it was in April, we launched the first ever 32-hour fest. So it was basically a music mixers and an event essentially that ran across 32 hours. What we found is that in a time when everyone was really on a downward spiral, it lifted the audience and immediately made you realize that as a platform, as a radio platform, we have the ability to change the mindsets of young people. And that was a key learning for us in going forward. I think radio at this stage has showcased its ability to connect people, or to connect young people in a space and time when human connection is missing. So we needed to find that perfect balance of connecting our audience to other people without using physical contact. And I think that just speaks to the agility of young people, but it also speaks to the agility of the brand that I serve. I think from an events point of view, that's what we've done. From a commercial aspect, we've obviously had to shift, and from a sponsorship point of view, we pull sponsors into those new events, as you'd call them, the virtual events. Yeah, I'm still in two minds about whether or not they actually work. But yeah, having the ability to put that onto broadcast platform really did work for us in a 32-hour fest in April. Our streaming numbers just kind of spiked. So yeah, it worked. Just from a connection point of view, I think radio has showcased its ability to adapt and change very quickly. And you'd see that across many of the broadcast platforms across the industry. You had like the likes of the SABC pulling in educational content. You had a YFM looking at a GBV increase in GBV cases and creating new talk shows almost, speaking to youth issues. And I think a number of, Jacaranda as an example, went and looked at their lineup and shifted their programming. So from a radio perspective, holistically, I think we've showcased an ability to adapt, and definitely the agility has come through.
Alfie, let me come to you. I mean, we're sitting with radio stations on this call that, occupy very specific spaces in very specific regions within the country. A lot of what advertisers are asking and looking for is very detailed information on, where does this person live? What does their day look like? What is the information that we can use as a marketer to kind of engage with them with our service offering? And I would imagine that a lot of the demands when you are sort of quite region specific is, well, how has COVID impacted this person living in this part of South Africa, them going to the office every day, not going to the office every day? People start questioning things like, is 7:15 still the best time for you to air your piece on the morning sort of radio show when people are, working from home? All these kind of behavioral changes. Tell me about keeping up to date with that research and what the demands have been this year in terms of advertisers saying, well, is 7:15 the best slot? Because all my friends now tell me that, 8:15 is when they're actually tuning in. So little intricacies like that from a research perspective, how have you kind of kept up to date with, people's behavioral changes with progressing lockdown levels?
Aria, good morning. Thank you. Look, the market that we serve, and we've been in this market now for almost 35 years. You don't suddenly want to figure out what people are doing. It's something that you kind of know, because otherwise you wouldn't have survived. So knowing our audience like we do and knowing our target market like we do, one of the first things we realized, and let's be honest, we're talking about the Eastern Cape. It's a market that's often very hard hit with really not nice news, and this predates COVID. So what we tried to do in the marketplace is no different to what we did under lockdown, which was report the facts, do so fairly accurately within context, all the while furthering the dynamics of cohesion and trying to give people a better life. So we took that mantra and we said, okay, guys, we know how this works. I will tell you this much, that I don't think any one of us has worked as hard as we have since we went into lockdown. Because the truth is this, while everybody around us was closing down, we not only had to just be on air and be there for our audience and figure out and reel with clients and try and be as empathetic as we could be, we also had to reimagine what the audience is going through. So had you asked me prior to COVID, what is your job? We would have said, our job is to deliver prospects to advertisers and to deliver shareholder value. You ask me now and I'm saying, we are the barman, we are the psychologist, we are the friend, we are the advisor. We've become a very different organization, not in terms of who we are, but rather how we serve our clients, how we serve our audience, how we serve our very own people. Because that's the other really scary thing in radio, is that the whole world around you is shutting down, but you've got to continue. And I think it challenged every single one of us. And the beauty of the National Association of Broadcasters, which is the auspices under which we are here today, brings us together very often. So Nick Evstatio and I, although we are in the same radio group, we've known each other for a long time in radio. Hasina Kasim and I have served on committees and we've worked together for a long time. East Coast Radio is a radio station that we've got people there that used to work for me that work there now. So we're all very close. We speak to each other, we communicate. And that's the beauty of radio, is that it's not just our job to communicate with our audience, but also to communicate with others to say, what was your experience? What's going on in your market? Because the dynamics were different. The statistics were different. The spread was different. The impact on the economy was different. These are all different regions. We serve different target markets. Hasina is into the youth market. East Coast Radio, the Central Media Group with OFM as its main radio station, is into the market of the Free State and the Southern Gauteng strip. Whereas we're looking at the Eastern Cape, we into the Garden Route, we're a little bit into the Karoo. The key thing, and coming back to what you asked, is how's the change been? What has the impact been? How did we, if you look at all the questions you've asked, so all it is the same thing, and that is, how did you adapt? How quickly did you react? How did you measure things? In terms of measurement, we are quite fortunate in that from a research perspective, it's coming in all day long. If you're not monitoring what's happening on your WhatsApp line or on your Telegram line, or seeing what people are engaging with you about on social media, if you're not the radio station that understands them, you're dead in the water. And I think it is fair to say that radio in this country stood up very strongly during this period. I know that one of the previous chats that you hosted, we looked at all of the statistics, all of us gave feedback into it. I think there was a case study which was immaculate because it showcased a myriad of very good radio intelligence. It showed a vast diversity in approaches from all the various different radio stations. And I really think that if after all of this, government doesn't give radio a very solid pat on the back for what it did to assist the public through this, then something's wrong.
Okay, that's a beautiful
answer. I mean,
it's incredibly self-actualized as well, from a perspective of, we're sitting on a call here with NAB commercial radio members, and to speak about this almost shift in terms of, what the sentiment is at these commercial stations that you guys represent, moving more from sort of bottom line to how are we serving people and how do we bring the bottom line into that as a function of serving people. I mean, that's a massive shift in terms of how commercial radio stations are operating. And I want to kind of pick up on that a little bit with you, Bonnie, in terms of, a salesperson who works at a radio station, at a commercial radio station, is targets driven. They know they have to do X, Y, and Z. So how do we, start to take what Alfie's speaking about in terms of the conversations happening at the top of a radio station around the self-actualized view of serving people and profit being a function of that, and how do we get that to land with the person who's trying to reach these targets, who's hugely impacted by COVID-19? It really is a case almost of putting the listener's needs first, and then serving them with sort of, advertising material afterwards. And perhaps we are in a space where it became very commercially led. But talk to me about striking that balance within the entire framework, including the sales team.
Sure. Thank you for that. I think for me, now more than ever, we need to emphasize the importance of servant leadership. Like, we need to serve, whether it's our employees, whether it's our audiences, whether it's our trade partners. We can't be treating people like clients. We have to treat them like partners because we are all in this together. And I think really radio has done very well. One other thing which we have done very, very well during this time, I think radio is very good in terms of research and understanding consumers. But first-party data research that we've been doing on an ongoing basis, just to make sure that we have data-driven conversation when we are engaging with our trade partners, has been absolutely a pleasure for us and for the team, when they're going out to see clients, because everybody want to understand the listener behavior, especially during this time. There's a point Hasim made earlier about having to change programming. And I think you as well, Eri, where you were saying, where is the right time to space your advertising? We had to shift our breakfast time. Our breakfast time had to start later than the normal time, just to accommodate the consumer behavior during COVID. For instance, level 5, level 4, level 3. At level 3, we needed to adjust again and adapt and make sure that we speak to the demands of our listeners during that time. So really, making sure that the servant leadership is on at next level. Like, we really need to understand what is happening on the ground. We need to understand what's happening in the market. We need to understand what's happening in our communities. But most importantly, we've had to do things that if you had asked me in January, will you be able to take your entire primetime shows and make them a broadcast from home? I would have probably said in January, never, we will never be able to do that. But when the 26th of March happened, we had to close shop in our offices because everybody had to work from home, but still work. And we were able to enable all our shows to be able to broadcast on time, in full, and make sure that we inform, we educate our communities like we have done in the past. And I think radio has really shown up. We've done that to the best of our capabilities, and I think we did it very well, really, as an industry. We did it very well in terms of making sure we serve our communities, we serve our staff, we serve our partners, and ultimately our shareholders.
I mean, it's we tend to forget that there was a time when you could only walk outside between 6 and 9 in the morning. We tend to forget these intricacies of lockdown. We tend to forget that you guys would have been on the receiving end of trying to figure out, well, what does a legal pass for a presenter to get to the studio actually look like? Do I even want them in the studio?
Precisely.
I mean, the pressures on the entire ecosystem have been absolutely insane this year. We are live this morning with the NAB commercial radio members speaking about commercial radio in South Africa in a context of 2020 moving into 2021, speaking to different topics, the evolution of radio in a pandemic, the psychological impact and behavioral changes in various communities. You can, of course, give us your questions live right now in the live chat. I want to go to some of these questions. This question is from Guy McDonald. Guy says, drive show listening patterns have changed drastically. How do we recapture those audiences now that they are no longer captive in their cars? I'll add a layer to that question saying, well, is that true? Hasina, what is the data saying?
So I think from a YFM perspective, it's always been a little bit different to other commercial spaces. We've always seen a rather different pattern and almost like consistent listening across daytime. Yes, we have our peaks, but what we found over this period, especially considering that our streaming listening has gone up by 40%, because that's the only measurement that we have right now. So we're seeing over this period a 40% increase, and we're still seeing the spikes. So our one spike would come in at 6 p.m. when we've got YTK, which is specialized programming. Again, it's mixed shows, and that just kind of speaks to the psychological space that we're finding our listeners in, and almost looking for the very positive, upbeat, motivational type of content. And that's where we're kind of seeing our peak. So across our daytime, we're seeing consistency. Breakfast, we're still having our show, our morning show trends every morning. So you're still seeing a lot of engagement in the breakfast show and across the daytime. So yeah, I wouldn't really be able to tell you if other stations what has happened there, but from a YFM perspective, we've seen a lot of consistency. In fact, we've seen an increase in listenership.
Wow.
Can I come in there, Ari?
Yeah, go for it.
Can I come in just with one point? I think you spot on, Hasina. However, if you look at listenership during level 5, level 4, when people were really working from home, for us, we saw a little shift, which is why we had to start our breakfast time a little. I think we started at 7 instead of 6, because people were waking up later than they normally do, and they were not driving as much as they did when they had to drive to work and drive back from work to home. So there was, but then what we're seeing the trend now that we are on from level 2 and level 1, we're seeing that the trend is going back to the normal listening time. I don't know. I think it's like that in KZN at least. And I'd like to think the trend is more or less similar, maybe in other markets as well.
Yeah. Can I jump in here as well? I think over this period, we found that with the increases in listening on streaming platforms, we're actually seeing an upward trend, and it's actually continuing over that period. So I think lockdown has actually served us. It's like in every adversity, there's opportunity. And I think because radio has that agility that we were speaking about earlier, we are also very versatile-minded individuals that kind of speak to, the theater of the mind and all the rest. So for us, we've always seen opportunity in adversity. And looking at the trend, we are actually, as a station, finding that the upward listening trend is continuing, which means that we've captured audiences in a time where people were locked in their houses. We know that radio listening was increasing during that time. We've also seen that during that period, people were listening for longer periods of time. So you had time spent listening increasing. You had content changing and shifting, but you basically captured your audience or a bigger audience within that period. And that is actually continuing. So it's a really positive thing, and it speaks to the future of radio as well. And the fact that we actually have a space and will continue to.
Alfie, let me come to you on this topic of data and listenership. Obviously, there's 1,000,001 channels within data which comes into a radio station. There's digital, there's streaming, there's listening diaries. In the context of COVID-19, where do you sit on the data front and measuring the listenership and what those trends are?
Sure. Arya, if I can come back to your question momentarily, I just want to try and add some value to the question that Guy asked, which was drive time shifted. How do we react? And I think the key thing here is that we must always bear this in mind. In the life of the listener is trying to be like me and you. We're trying to live a consistent life. We're trying to stick to our routines, and we know that some people don't like routines, but it's a reality of life. Along comes COVID, boom, everything changes. But has it really changed? Has it changed our aspirations? Probably not. Does it change our beliefs? Probably not. There's a lot of things that didn't change, but what changed was the circumstances, the fear-mongerer, the concern about job security, etc. All of those things played a massive role in people's lives. But ultimately, our audience is our audience. And here's the thing. Drive time is different to mid-morning. It's different to late night. We know that because we're trying to capture an audience and deliver some value to them in the space that they find themselves so we can build a connection. But the key thread here through all of this, so we've heard it from Messina, Bonnie had that experience, Nick had that experience, everyone had that experience, where if your engagement is generally good with your audience, that engagement grew substantially and continues to. Now back to your question in terms of measurement. Look, we subscribe and they're partners of ours. Although we pay them for the service, Colony Live is something that we subscribe to, and we've been a part of their journey since the time they set up shop in the country. And together with them, they've built in research tools, and we've been able to engage with. Nick, I know, has been a lot more active than I have, for example, but we have engaged a lot and asked a lot of questions of our audience. They've gladly shared that information with us. And that information has not only helped us from the perspective of how to program to the audience's needs right now, because you really can get that Q&A done. You can get the feedback in momentarily. It's been a huge beneficial tool for us in radio, but it's also been great data to be able to present to our clients, because ultimately, and I agree with what Bonnie said, your clients, your listeners, your staff, we are all people. We are all here. We are all going through this together. But here's the thing. If I can come to you and add value by saying, this is what's happening right now, there isn't a bigger value than that. And that's why this medium, radio, will live on forever. It's a great medium. The measuring matrix are in place. The data sets that we can get back from that, we can turn around in an hour. In the same way that we can script something and get it on air within 10 minutes. The way to access data when you engage closely with your audience and you stay focused on their needs, that's a win.
Nick, research, listener behavior, and we are going to have a broader conversation in a second. I see a question coming through from Gordon around data, around RAMs, around going out to all of that. We're going to address it in a second. But Nick, let me come to you broadly on research and behavior in a 2020 context, and just adding to what everyone's been saying so far.
Thank you. I see I disappeared there for a second. I apologize. I just want to speak to what Alfie said earlier about, being knowing everybody in the radio sector so well, having good relationships over time. That's allowed us to be able to actually share best practices across the board often. And during this period, I think we've been so research focused to try and understand not just the behaviors of our listeners, so we can take that information back to our clients and our marketing partners, but also to understand the behaviors of our clients, because many of those clients, they would be, a partner on the radio station looking for a specific customer for many, many years. And then one day they just had to stop advertising because their businesses were closed. So then as their marketing partner, what do you do with that information? Do you just stop advertising and wait until the president makes another announcement that opens up the economy? Or do you go, okay, I believe that as a marketing partner and partnering in your business as well, we need to change your message, be more empathetic, like I mentioned earlier. But talking to the research, I mean, during level lockdown 5, 4, 3, 2, and now at level lockdown 1, OFM has been very, very active in its research to understand the behaviors of our listeners. Speaking to what Bonnie mentioned earlier, as well as Hasina, with regards to the content offering on our radio stations, we've had to shift a lot of stuff we've done. And at the same time, we've had to really be aware of the kind of content we put on air. So, and I keep using the word, so we are empathetic to our audiences. Also empathetic to our clients. With regards to the research and the behaviors of our audiences, we ask the questions, would you shop online? Because that's a new sector that has now exploded. Radio, I fully believe, has been at the forefront of creating an e-commerce sector that is a lot more powerful than it has ever been before. Having said that, within the retail sector, we've also been able to assist the retailers, the likes of the Checkers, Pick and Pay, Woolworths, etc., to push their new offerings from the e-commerce perspective. Within our business here at Central Media Group, we've got a digital company as well. We've been able to create e-commerce solutions that support a radio presentation as well. And as you go through the levels and you understand the behaviors of audiences, you understand that their behavior influences your client and your customer's advertising message, as well as what you put on the radio station itself. We're now sitting with another research study where we've actually split it in two, because I asked the question for the sector and as well as for the radio station OFM and for everybody else, because we share all of this information. My question is, what is summer, December, and Christmas going to look like? We don't know, because businesses have been closed for such a long time. Are people still going to go on leave? Is the tourism sector going to be open so they can accept people? Can we go to Hartbeespoort? Can we go to Durban? Are we allowed to go on holiday? Can I even afford to go on holiday? Or do I look at my backyard and I say, okay, can we resurrect the tourism sector in central South Africa? And instead of going down to the seaside, sorry, Alfie and Bonnie, can we have a family time in my backyard just up the road? How do we take hands with the tourism sector in our area specifically, and then try and grow that sector by itself?
If I can just jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
Just to add to what Nick said, and I mean, I'm actually in Bloemfontein right now. We've been sitting talking about not just our radio stations and our group, but also just the business in general. And to add to what Nick said, and it's probably something he just didn't get to right now, and that is the other concern we have, particularly, and I think all radio has this concern right now, is how does January look? Because traditionally, January from a commercial space looks like this. Economically, we're driven by money coming in, right? And traditionally, all those years ago, 30 years ago, back to school was the biggest thing since sliced bread. It's not that anymore. But here's the other problem we have. Schools are only going back right about the 27th of January. And in radio, we know that you cannot get an agency to breathe until schools have gone back and they're back from their holidays. So how's January going to look? These are deep concerns, because all the love and all the good that we do for our audiences and for our partners and for our clients is driven by an economy. It's the economy of the media. And it is a big concern, not just for radio. It's a big concern for television. It's a big concern for print. It's a big concern for anybody who's in the advertising space. How is January going to look? And bear in mind, January will shape its thoughts on the back of retail spend. It will shape its thoughts on the back of how December looked. So right now, looking into the future, and it's not a doom and gloom question, but we need data. We need to ask people, what are your plans? What are you doing? How are you going about things? Because if we don't know, how are we going to react?
Yeah. Can I add something? Sorry, Nick.
I want to get to some of the next questions, because we have a big question sort of theme coming through around RAM. So I'm going to quickly wrap up on research with you, Bonnie, and then we'll come to you, Nick, and then I'm going to go to Gordon's question on the live chat.
Sure. I think the last thing, one last thing I'd like to say, the question about what will happen in terms of tourism. Will people travel? Will people be at home? I think the sentiment that we are seeing currently is that everybody in South Africa, because we've been locked down for so long, everybody's yearning to get out. Like in KZN, just for Heritage Day on the 24th of September, every accommodation place was chock-a-block. They were full to capacity because everybody. I think people won't be traveling internationally. I think that's my view. I think people won't be traveling internationally, but I think domestic tourism will boom because South Africans just want to get around And I hope that there will be no resurgence of COVID. There will be no, like they're talking now about the COVID coming back and that kind of thing. I just hope there will be no rebound, and then South Africans will be able to get around. There's something about us that is just, we are alive in the midst of impossibilities as a country. So I think tourism will boom, Nick, I think.
Ronnie, thank you for that. I just wanted to add to Alfie with regards to what would January look like. That's a very important question to ask. That's why research is so important for us as an industry. I mentioned earlier that we've become so research focused right now. That should be number one strategy going forward, to be able to share that data, not just with our own clients, but with everybody that engages with our individual brands and products. If I look softly at some of the research we're doing now with regards to clients, are you closing your business? Are you sending your staff at home? Are you going to be operating at full capacity? And then listener behavior, are you going on holiday? It speaks to, yes, I want to, but I can't afford. Yes, I want to, but I don't know where. Yes, I want to, but I am scared. And when I read the words like I am scared, I think to myself, it is radio's moral duty to be able to communicate in a way to lift the spirits of this country immediately. It's us to do that. We can't rely on government or any other sectors, because we have got millions and millions and millions of people that engage with our brands on a daily basis, and it's our moral duty to lead that fight.
I want to, I think we're having a fascinating conversation this morning, a very rare conversation. Actually, as we're having it, I'm realizing how rare this is to have this conversation with NAB commercial radio members. We spoke quite a bit on research, the importance of it's been emphasized. Research, we put so much emphasis on because research determines price in terms of what airtime and campaigns and activations cost, which segues quite nicely into Gordon's question. Gordon says the discussion is centered around agility, versatility, real-time data, but pricing is still based on the old Rams diary. Isn't it time when Rams goes out to tender in 2021 to thinking in terms of ditching diaries, or at least balancing the scorecard with listening panels and even personal meters? So let's spend a second just unpacking what research looks like. I know that the sort of Rams debate is an age-old debate, so I'm sure everyone's going to want to weigh in on this. But Hasina, let me come to you in terms of research, price card, economic pressures, and how that all starts to look moving into 2021.
Just to, I think, I take a step back and see where we're at right now. We know that RAMS historically was based on fieldwork studies. COVID happened, and all of a sudden fieldwork couldn't go out, which is why we're sitting in the situation that we're in. I'm sure everyone who's tuned in right now is aware that the BRC, who's basically the caretaker of our currency, is in the process of going through an RFP process where we're looking for a new supplier that can basically shape the currency and what it looks like in the future. During this period, they are also looking at an interim measure to make sure that the industry is sitting with some form of research. I cannot right now give you a time frame as to when that will come out, but I do know that the industry at large and radio as a collective are working together towards getting something out into the industry that actually works and benefits everyone concerned, and is able to give us the most credible understanding of what the audience behaviors are like with audio consumption. And I say audio consumption because that's where the thinking really is. When it comes to where we are at right now, and how do we, during this period leading up into the interim research that will be developed through the BRC, I think we are in a space where, and as YFM, I think we've always been there. It's about quality of audience. It's about understanding the behavior, knowing what the consumption of media is, what the consumption of brands is, and it's really a deep understanding of your audience, and it comes right back to that. When we go out and sell, if you look by the numbers, you're going to die by the numbers, and I think that is it's very clear. So it's what's the quality, what is the thinking, what is the understanding of these individuals. We've seen over a period of time that the usual generic type of advertising it's still very valuable. It's needed. It's something that's used by our clients. But at the same time, we're finding that there's a shift towards a creative solution. There's a shift towards authentic sort of understanding and collaboration of brands, really. So as opposed to just a generic campaign, you're finding that our personality speaking about a brand and using a brand themselves personally, I think, has shifted the way in which we sell. You're now able to deliver a return on investment and a real true understanding of what a campaign is actually doing because of the integrated campaigns that we've developed. So if a brand hypothetically comes in and is running a campaign holistically across all of our platforms, which is the app, all the social media, as well as an on-air broadcast component, you are able to see what the campaign is doing right now in this moment, and you're able to shift and change that. So when it comes to selling during this time and research during this time, I think using the real-time data that we do already have is proving to be beneficial, and I think will continue to be that way. Currency-wise, going forward, yes, we definitely need a currency, but I think that there are going to be major shifts. Radio is, and my colleagues in the radio industry are all very well aware that perhaps a fieldwork study where you're using clipboard is archaic. And we need to shift with the time. So everyone is, I would say, fully aware of that. And we are definitely moving towards a new age on currency and research.
Alfie, Rams and Ratecard, do you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, gladly, yes. I think firstly, back in the day, it was very, very true to say that your rate card was determined by Rams. But I think over the last 10 to 12 years, it's fair to say in the media industry that eventually people realize, and Nasina made the very valid point, that if you live by the numbers, you'll die by the numbers. But here's the thing, willing buyer, willing seller. The old concept of supply and demand. You are not going to want to come to Algoa FM and spend money if you can't see the value in it, right? So yes, listenership figures do play a role in it, like they do for all radio stations. But right now, we sit in a situation, and being part of the radio committee on the Broadcast Research Council, I can give you my assurance that we're working very hard to get an interim solution, and then we're busy with that request for proposal to get a new solution. And we know, as Asina said, clipboards, even tablets in the field, that's old, it's slow. Listen to the research we were talking about earlier, Colony Live. I can ask my audience a question now, and I can get the answer back straight away. That's okay for qualitative measure and for quick dipstick surveys, but when it comes to looking at the numbers, you do need something more in depth. But the reality is this, your rate card might be compared to another rate card perceived as expensive or less expensive. The point of the matter is when you go to the happy client on any radio station and you say to them, what return on investment are you getting out of spending money on the campaign, on that radio station? And they say to you, I am in cloud 9. You know that the price is right. And here's the other thing. With the spikes and the dips and also with fieldwork study, and there are errors. The errors do creep in. There are margins of errors in all forms of research. We must never lose sight of that. Doesn't matter how it's done. Scientifically, there's going to be something that blurs. So the reality is you could go in a situation, and I know that Bonnie's radio station had this happen to them just last year, where suddenly, out of the blue, all these listeners disappeared. And we went, how did that happen? Lots of questions were asked, and then what it boiled down to was a sampling matter, and it had to do with people that were or weren't available for research. You can't now go and change your entire rate card just because you had one banned book. So to try and add a little bit of value into what Gordon was asking earlier, Rams figures are, that currency is very, very crucial for people to get a very basic understanding of what we are about as an industry and the various brands that sit in this radio landscape. It's key. It's also helpful to determine some form of cost per thousand, but I don't think any radio station in its right mind is going to base its rate card purely on listenership figures.
I mean, Nick, are people overly critical of, living and dying by these numbers? I mean, certainly audiences look different. They have different propensities to spend. Do you feel that the media buying industry is perhaps a little bit too black and white, cut and dry when it comes to, well, if you don't have 200,000 listeners, you're not for me, and aren't really actually doing the work on their side as well to dive a little deeper into what that audience looks like and what their different sort of income levels and sort of, economic situations are?
Look, speaking to what Alfie had to say about winning buyer, winning seller, the one key thing about RAMs and having these metrics and having these numbers available to us, it gives us insights into our own product. It gives us insights and allows us to make strategical, tactical decisions on what it is that we want to offer our audience, because we understand them better. So if I look at OFM, our P1 listener, if that person had to walk through the door, and as we understand them, that's how we put our business together. And that person is a 35-year-old female who drives a 4x4 SUV, has insurance, goes on holiday two times a year, has got a small dog, etc., etc., etc. So we dive quite deep organically for ourselves to understand who we are catering to. And with that information, it does give the marketers and advertisers insights into the market that we cater for, the value of that market that exists. And that's where the Ratecard comes from. We value our market quite nicely, and we believe that we've got a high-end market from an OFM perspective. And these numbers add value to be able to, if you're an agency representing a brand and you want to look at various different market sectors, without these numbers, you can't make proper decisions. So also the relationships with the agencies is quite important, and the understanding and education of each brand, who we service, regardless of audience, who we service, how active we are, how engaged our audiences are. And that's all that information you can pull out of these numbers. But these are insights. As Alfie mentioned earlier, one bad book, you lose 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 audience. Doesn't make you a bad brand. It was just a bad exercise. And we can't be judged on that.
Buddy, I want to add a layer to it and pick up on what Hasina was talking about in terms of, well, you know, even if you have 2 million people or 10 million people seeing something, or you have those ears, you know, Hasina was speaking about the importance of the creative solution and, you know, what you do and what you feed that audience, because you can have a massive audience, but if your messaging isn't great, it's generic, it feels like it's the same on every station. It's a 30-second ad that an agency's produced that doesn't really land with the intricacies of your community, but you're sort of playing it anyway because it's filling up an ad break. Tell me a little bit about the sort of role of creative solutions in a radio infrastructure moving into 2021 to really start tailoring stuff. And if the South African advertising community is sort of progressive enough in thinking, but realizing that they actually maybe won't be able to put as many generic 30-seconders on every station as they did before if they want to engage meaningfully that audience that you have.
Exactly. Thanks, Ari, for that. I think for me, an important thing to mention is that our proposition to advertisers as East Coast Radio is the quality of our audience. That's our proposition, right? And the fact that we constantly engage with them in order to understand what makes them tick and really understand the meaning of the true meaning of connection between them and our personalities. So what we have done as a group, Kagiso Media, we've invested on a program called MDP, Management Data Program, where we really are obsessed about understanding the listener that listens to East Coast Radio. So to everybody to advertise with East Coast Radio, you must expect us to want to get to know your business. Because if we do so, we will be able to sell our ecosystem with science, and expect us to tailor-make our solutions, because we will be understanding your business, our customers, our listeners, and then we will be able to offer them a solution that speaks to what your pressure points are, what the objectives are that you are trying to achieve. And we do so, all of this, because we understand them. And there's a point Alfie made about pricing. This year, I think, and the entire media industry has kind of halted a price increase and that kind of thing, because everybody understands, and we are very much aligned in understanding the trading conditions that we find ourselves in as a media and as people in business. So we understand a lot about our customers through the DMP data management program that we have. And so we are able to offer solutions that are tailor-made and that they'll speak to what the objectives of the campaign is at our different platforms. I think what's important really is to understand how can you influence listeners or customers in all these platforms, in all the ecosystems that we spoke about, and engage with them meaningfully so that you deliver return on investment for advertisers. One last point I want to make is, when we were doing research earlier this year, is that over 60% of the people who listen to radio, they also connect with us on social platforms, on all these social platforms. So to how you show up, whether on air, on the web, online, on podcasting, becomes that much important, so that you are able to tailor make a solution that will speak to the objectives that you are trying to achieve. So yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time. We are going to land it with a question that came through from Barry earlier, and I'll preempt that question now so that everyone, all our panelists, can get a chance to think about what their sort of response is, because I'm going to come to everyone on it. The question from Barry was, what has been the biggest blessing in disguise that has come from COVID-19 for the various stations? But just before we land with that question, I just want to quickly come back to Hasina, because there is some conversation in the chat here around creative solutions. And Hasina, if you could take your YFM cap off for a second, and just your broader radio cap around, the sales infrastructures within radio stations in South Africa. Is enough emphasis being placed on the creative solutions department? Because there is some rhetoric in the chat here around, third-party suppliers being quite good at that creative solutions aspect, and perhaps radio stations needing to be a little bit better at it themselves within that sales unit infrastructure.
Thank you. I think, yes, there definitely needs to be a bigger emphasis. Look, I can't speak from authoritatively from a broader perspective, because YFM is my experience, right? And that's my predominant radio experience. What I would say is that it's made a massive impact having a focus on creative solutions within our environment. And I think it would definitely do the same across the board. When it comes to the type of engagement or the type of creative solutions that actually work, I think we've already shifted to a space where we are in purpose-driven radio. Finding creative solutions where you are talking to an audience and collaborating with brands in the creative space that speaks to the same sort of ethos and DNA of your own brand makes a massive difference. So when if you look at, how do I put this? If you say Time Bank as a hypothetical example, right? Time Bank launched in 2018. And what they wanted to do was to make a massive impact. What we did as a station was we collaborated with the creative solutions and found a 360 approach that actually gave a 4,000% sort of conversion rate on the campaign. And this shows the impact and the value of creative solutions. So I would say, yes, definitely there should be a focus going forward in that. It definitely speaks directly to the audience. You're engaging at a different level. Your brand is going to come across a lot stronger. And the authenticity of brands, because we are in a space of, again, purpose and authenticity. And if you are a brand that has a value system, if it aligns with the media platform that you're speaking to or that you're using, you'll find a way to authentically bring that message across and land with the listener at that specific station. Not sure if that answers the question. If you need me to elaborate a little further, I can.
Well, I think we've got 7 minutes left. We don't have to cut to news, but someone might have a 10 a.m. Zoom meeting. So very quickly, I'm going to ask Nick to just round us out on the creative solutions discussion and then take closing thoughts with Barry's question from everyone.
Thank you. Speaking to that question about creative solutions, I think as a radio industry, we're looked at to come up with these ideas. If you look at the way we market our own products or the content offerings we create on air, the manner in which we do it, we think about ourselves so we can attract the bigger audiences, more valuable audiences. If you take a step back, we should be asking ourselves the following question: what do we actually sell? We actually sell, one, our audiences, but the second thing is I sell whatever my client is advertising. So we should have the creative ideas flowing out of our own systems to be able to help our client sell his car, sell his headache tablet, sell his holiday, sell the boat. I think it's quite important. And also it adds a better experience for the listener to the radio station.
All right, well, let's take this closing question from Barry. Everyone's going to get a chance to answer it. If you could just keep your question answer sort of around about the minute mark. Barry Ferreira asks, what has been the biggest blessing in disguise that has come from COVID-19 for the various stations? Quite a strong and pertinent poetic note almost to end our conversation on. Let me come to you first, Elfie. Just unmuting.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So for me, ultimately, the biggest blessing was my people. I don't know how else to put it. Without a very good team, without a team that cares about what it does, but rather why it does it, you're dead in the water. Values kicked in. There was a very caring, nurturing attitude from everyone in the business. And not just about us, but rather about our audience, our clients. We were having conversations 10 o'clock at night between some of the presenters who were on air from home, having a look at some of the horror stories that were coming in as listeners were communicating their concerns and their passions and their fears. So it was a very real time. And for me, the biggest blessing that came out of it was knowing who my people are and what they stand for. That was huge. Because here's the thing, we're all on air. We all have radio stations. We're all in business. We are there to do our function and deliver for our clients and deliver for everyone for that matter, to keep jobs, to grow. But when something like this comes along, it kind of really, really changes the goalposts very, very quickly. But it doesn't matter if the goalposts change and you've got a great team, because guess what they're going to do? They're going to put that ball in the net. And that was the one thing that I can say that came out for me. It's the biggest blessing for me, was the fact that I had a team who was able to jump into agility just like this, who put the needs of others way before their own and really delivered not just for us as a brand, but specifically for our listeners. Because I always say, without listeners, you don't have clients. So our focus remained on our listeners in the local context. Our clients are our listeners. So you've got to service that as your number one. That's your number one job. And once you've got that relationship going, you then grow the family by bringing clients into the relationship, etc. But biggest blessing answered, my people, I love you.
Bonnie, very quickly, paint me a picture at East Coast Radio, the silver lining of COVID-19.
Yeah, I think for me, it's these 5 things. One, it's the biggest wins for radio is the credibility that radio has gained during this time. We saw our numbers in terms of listenership going up from like people who, if you look at our data, almost 16% of people listen to 6 hours of radio on an ordinary day. But during COVID, that went up to 32%. So credibility, trustworthy source of information was the big thing for me. That's externally. And then if you look internally, I want to echo what Elfie is saying in terms of our people and our partners. I mean, we've been trade engaging with all our trade partners despite the challenges that we were finding ourselves. So it's our people, our partners, our communities that we serve. I mean, we've done things for communities that we serve and then ultimately have been able to grow radio listenership. So honestly, I think if anything, COVID has done wonders for radio, from just bringing that credibility that, you know, there could be news everywhere, but the ones you find from radio, they are trustworthy and credible. Thank you.
Nick, in 30 seconds.
Like an ad break, thanks. I think we all agree. I mean, the power of our people has been phenomenal. Our human capital have led us through this dark period, and we should be very proud. At Central Media Group, OFM, we've got a mantra, we call it family first, and this family has been incredible.
Hasina Landas, the question was, what has been the biggest blessing in disguise that has come from COVID-19 for the various stations?
Being human has never been this simple. And I think that there just speaks to everything holistically. It's just the human element needs to come out, and it has.
Wow. Well, a powerful conversation this morning, certainly a one-of-a-kind conversation to have these NAB commercial radio members come together to talk everything from RAMs to pricing to profit to creative solutions to research to COVID to teamwork to agility and ultimately to the silver lining. It certainly makes all the good inputs for a great 2021 story, and we look forward to seeing what happens in the corridors of Algoa FM, YFM, Central Media Group and East Coast Radio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you missed any of this, it'll be available on the Arena Events platforms on demand. Once again, thank you to our guests this morning, MD at Algoa FM, Alfie J, Hasina Kasim, MD at YFM, Nick Efstathiou, CEO at Central Media Group, and Bonnie Mklunu, MD at East Coast Radio. Certainly a powerful conversation, and thank you so much to Arena Events and the NAB for making this morning possible. We hope to be around the boardroom table with all of you again very, very soon, in person or digitally, we're not sure yet. But either way, very comforting to hear the voices behind some of the biggest stations in our country speaking to 2020 and radio in a COVID-19 context. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Bye.